Hello and welcome to TEDMED's live event focusing on the great challenge of reducing childhood obesity. I'm Sally Squires and I'll be moderating today's discussion, which is going to run about an hour. This session is part of the Great Challenges program sponsored by the Robert Wood Foundation. The goal of the Great Challenges program is to look at 20 of the most complex problems in health and medicine. These are issues that can't be solved with a magic bullet or a one-shot cure of policy. So our mission today is not to solve these issues, but really to share ideas from many disciplines to reach a better understanding of them than we had before. We'll be taking questions from viewers on Google Hangout and on Facebook and Twitter. So if you're on Twitter, look use the Twitter handle of @TEDMED and just tag your questions with hashtag Great Challenges, and we'll really try to get to them. We love that interaction. So just to recap, I'm Sally Squires, and TEDMED asked me to be here because I co-wrote the Stoplight Diet for Children many years ago, which was about childhood obesity. I've got a graduate degree in nutrition, and I spent a lot of years at the Washington Post running the Lean Plate Club, which was a social media community, kind of one of the early ones that focused on healthy eating and nutrition. And today I'm at Powell Tate, which is a public affairs firm here in DC. So I'm really delighted to welcome this group that is here today. I know many of them personally and have for quite a number of years. One of our first challenge team members is Larry Cohen, who is the founder and executive director of Prevention Institute. That's a national nonprofit center focused on improving community conditions and taking action to build resilience and to prevent illness and injury before they occur.
Good morning.
Good morning, welcome. Melissa Halas-Liang is a nationally recognized nutrition educator. She's a registered dietitian, a certified diabetes educator, and a wellness expert. So welcome, Melissa.
Thank you.
We have Dr. Ernie Medina, who is co-founder and CEO of MedPlay Technologies. He's worked as a preventive care specialist at Beaver Medical Group since 1993, developing and launching his pediatric obesity program, which is called Family Fit. And we have Christina Economos. Christina is the Vice Chair and Director of Child Obesity 180. This is an organization that provides cross-sector bipartisan engagement to key initiatives that deliver accelerated and amplified impact to improve the health of our nation's children. We have Elaine Kolish, who is Vice President and Director of the Children's Food and Beverage Advertising Initiative at the Council of Better Business Bureaus. And Elaine is a nationally recognized expert on advertising and consumer protection issues. And we have Barbara Moore, who is President and CEO of Shape Up America, a national campaign that was founded by former U.S. Surgeon General C. Everett Koop in 1994. So welcome to everyone. And I want to kick all of this off by sharing a couple of statistics with you that I think are really sobering. So we know childhood obesity is a problem, but many people may not realize that it's more than doubled in children and tripled in teens in the past 30 years, according to the National Center for Health Statistics. And if we look at those numbers a little more closely, we find that the percentage of children aged 6 to 11 in the US who were obese increased from 7% in 1980 to nearly 18% in 2010. And for teens, the picture isn't any better. So for those who are aged 12 to 19, the number of them who are obese rose from 5% in 1980 to 18% in 2010. So clearly we have a problem, we know this, and of course this is affecting our future. And so to kick off this discussion with this great group of experts, who by the way are coming to us literally coast to coast, we thought we'd start with this, this question of what are the top causes of obesity in children, and which ones can be reduced or prevented? So who would like to jump in with an answer to that?
This is Chris. I'll start.
Okay, go ahead.
So I think all of us appreciate the fact that it's an incredibly complex problem, and we didn't arrive here because of one change in our society. There are multiple things that have changed, and I'll highlight a few and the others can jump in. There are fewer opportunities for children to be physically active and expend energy in today's society. Physical education has been cut, the built environment has changed dramatically, and children don't play as they used to outside. There's been an increase in caloric consumption due to larger portion sizes, the plethora of energy-dense foods and fast food that are heavily marketed to children. And we've really changed our overall culture in terms of how we value food that goes into our body. In other words, we rely on convenient, cheap food. And although many of us are highly educated and would agree that healthy whole foods are the best things to consume, we've really been forced because of our societal changes to rely on a body of convenience foods that's definitely harming us. So those are just three quick things that I'll highlight. But overall, it's energy in being higher, energy out being lower, and many different changes in society that have impacted that equation.
So Ernie, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I was going to tag on. Oh, sorry. I was going to tag on to that. And so I'm glad she opened up with that because it is definitely a multifactorial problem. I would also add to that two other things. Not only is it the amount of calories that are going in, I also say that's the type of calories that are going in. And so because we know that type of calories now is as, if not maybe even more important than the amount of calories. So number one, I would say type of calories, and also, working with a lot of families for the last 20 years, it's very interesting. I have lots of friends and I have lots of families who live in the same built environment, and yet we have very active lives, we have very healthy kids, we know how to eat at fast food restaurants healthfully. So to me, it seems like if we could address the families, because it's going to take years, decades to change the built environment and to change policy and all, but families, we can change them, today and get them on the right paths. And so while we're doing all the other work, I think that if we could focus on the families and educating them and the parents, and I found that parents will do things for their families that they won't necessarily do for themselves, especially if their kids are at stake. So I find working with families much more enjoyable than just working with either adults and or kids by themselves.
So Barbara, what do you see at Shape Up America, and how does this fit? How do these views fit with what you're doing there with childhood obesity?
Well, I want to start off by just commenting on what's been said thus far. And for example, there's been a great deal of emphasis on the role of sugar-sweetened beverages in promoting childhood obesity. And what you've heard the group state very clearly is that there are many causes of childhood obesity. Therefore, if we were to actually change something like sugar-sweetened beverage consumption and really knock it back, you won't necessarily see childhood obesity problems turn around. You won't necessarily see prevalence of childhood obesity turn around. And that's because, as this group has just stated, there are many causes of childhood obesity, there are many contributing factors, and if we change just one, we won't necessarily get the benefit we're looking for. So it's important that we approach this problem on many, many different levels, on policy levels, on educational levels, on talking about school lunch, the affordability and availability of energy-dense, nutrient-poor foods and beverages. I mean, it goes on and on. But I just wanted to make the point that fixing one won't necessarily fix the problem.
And I'd like to also add in something on this. When we're looking at what Ernie said with the families, it's so critical to start with children under the age of 3. What we're finding in so many preschools across the U.S. is that kids are snacking at 10 a.m. on highly processed foods, and this is what their taste buds are getting used to enjoying, that quick food that dissolves instantly in the mouth. And I think we definitely need to see more preschool initiatives, dietitians anybody, an interested and active mom with good intentions, to get in there and say, hey, what's in that snack cupboard, and what are we feeding our kids, because we're setting up their eating habits for life.
Larry, I don't think you've weighed in on this yet. What do you think about all of this?
I'm just thinking about the comments that so many different people are making, and kind of, I mean, I think they're all right. I think it's a question of really looking at this comprehensively. And when we do, we see that it's the overall environment. If we wanted to encourage the diseases that come from unhealthy eating and activity, we almost couldn't do it much better than the way we're doing it right now. And I certainly agree that no one change is going to make the difference. But this might be a useful time to share that I worked on the country's first multi-city no smoking laws. That was related to workplaces and restaurants. And nevertheless, by focusing on one change, we started to build the momentum for norms change. I think the sugar-sweetened beverages emphasis is part of that. I think the emphasis on getting junk food out of schools is part of that. I certainly think we have to start with families, but we don't want to make the mistake of thinking we can do this one individual at a time. We can't do this unless we change the nature of the way we frame and respond to the problem.
So,
Can I make one more comment, Sally?
Yeah, so from an industry perspective, is this, Elaine, I just wanted to ask Elaine, what are you seeing, because I know the industry has done some things, and how does that fit with what everyone else has said?
Well, Sally, before I address that, I wanted to go back to Ernie and Chris's point about calories and the quality of calories and how things have changed over the last 20 or 30 years. And one thing that consistently strikes me is research from IFIC, the International Food Information Council, which has shown that most people find doing their taxes easier than reading a nutrition facts panel, and that most people don't know what calories are, let alone how many or how few they should eat. And it seems to me there's an important information deficit that needs to be addressed. I'm not saying that that one thing is going to solve the problem, obviously. I agree with everyone else that we need community-wide solutions and lots of other types of solutions. But it's, you know, I don't know whether I'm a nerd because I love reading nutrition facts panels, or, you know, has something in our society changed that no one wants, that the same time pressures that keep people from cooking at home keep them from reading a nutrition facts panel to see what's in the product. And I think we do need a campaign on a national level to help people understand nutrition so they can make better choices for their families.
You know, we did a study here where we looked at those panels, and what we found is that the front of the package, where the big ads are, where the big information is often very, very contradictory to the panels. What we were seeing is that it would say healthy food, now more calcium, and probably the overriding thing that we would find when we looked at the label was too much sugar, too much salt, too much fats, and that was true. Particularly what was concerning is that was true even for kids' foods, for foods that were considered to be the better for you foods. So it's a lot to ask someone to read the little label when the big label is deceiving people at the same time.
And this is Chris. If I could just jump in for a second. I agree that it's important to educate the public about deciphering food labels, but it's availability as well. And if we have the majority of foods available to us of unhealthy quality, and we are supposed to identify the healthier foods within that mass, it's quite challenging. So I think a shift of the composition is key.
So I want to just, these are all really great comments, but I want to make sure that we stay on target about childhood obesity, and obviously what we've been talking about relates to that. But we have a question actually from a Facebook user. This is from Tiffany Wilson Karp. And she has said that some American cities, including Philadelphia, New York, and even some states, Mississippi and California, are reporting small declines in the rate of childhood obesity. And she's asking, do you think these trends are going to continue? And also, what are the policies and programs that are helping to make these changes effective? And how do we take away lessons from those examples? So, Melissa, do you want to, I think you want to start this conversation off?
Sure. Well, I first would love to say that I'm always putting up the ads from New York City on my Facebook page, you know, where they have, would you feed your kid 11 packets of sugar a day? And then they have the picture of soda. They're just, their public health campaign in a lot of ways I think has been admirable and has gotten people's attention. It's hard for me, you know, I'm so lost in the day-to-day of childhood obesity. When I look at my daughter's school, and you hear in California, 1 in 3 kids is obese or overweight, and I look at her low-income school, and we're lucky if it's not 1 out of 1.5. You know, parents on the field trips are packing Cheetos and soda. We had to actually ban Cheetos at the school in order to stop hot Cheetos for breakfast. Yeah, we definitely have to examine what they're doing in these cities. It will be interesting to see if it continues to trend that way. But you know, here in California, I don't know. Maybe I'm not as hopeful. We have our work cut out for us.
So Christina, I know you're doing a lot of work, and you obviously have experience also with Shape Up Somerville, and just wondered, what do you think is accounting for some of these small improvements, and how are you expanding that with your Childhood 180?
Well, these cities and states are examples where strong policy changes have been implemented. In the schools with the school food, in fact, there were leaders across the country with mandatory minutes of physical activity within the schools and with community-wide policies that were instituted. So I think, as many people have said, it's a combination of strong policies that were implemented population-wide for children that resulted in this decrease. It wasn't one particular thing, but there was a strong emphasis to work within the schools, because that's where we know we can reach the majority of children 180 days a year for a lot of their waking time. So we need to follow in the footsteps of these aggressive policy changes that were championed by leadership throughout the communities and states.
Okay, so that's really good. So we've got leadership as one way, and how else do we spread these habits, these changes, so that they become as contagious as the obesity epidemic has risen? How do we spread this nationwide in other ways?
Sure. Well, I would just comment that the development of evidence is extremely important, because all of us want to be evidence-based in our approach. And the Institute of Medicine has issued several reports highlighting the evidence-based strategies, some of them I just named. And so I think we need to all, whether we're public health practitioners or scientists or parents, look at the evidence base, combine these strategies together, and scale those up nationwide instead of recreating the wheel.
So because we're trying to be really interactive, we have a number of questions that are coming from viewers right now. And one of them says that schools get very involved in eating habits when allergies are a problem. So why not with healthy food? And this is from Twitter, and it's from Christina Ronan Yali.
I think a lot of it has to do, you know, with cost and budget issues. It's really challenging. I mean, I'd like to commend the schools that are, especially in California, that are offering more, more produce. But it's difficult to, if you look at a program like, for example, Harvest of the Month, we have this excellent program in California. I don't know if anybody out there has heard of it, but they come into the class once a month. They have recipes, and the kids get involved in tasting it, and then they bring that home. And I can tell you, I've heard many kids in our neighborhood who've come up to me and said, we had asparagus in our smoothie. I mean, these are programs that work, like Christina said, that we have to implement in other schools. The schools are under such time constraints to integrate or to add another nutrition course that they really need to integrate it into the core competencies, and we've seen some schools have done that with success. I think that is key. But if you're looking at what schools are doing with more produce, we're having more gardens in schools. We're doing that. Those are the kind of programs that just need to be duplicated.
It's interesting, Melissa, that you're talking about some really nice programs in schools, and the whole conversation so far has primarily been on the food side. I want to bring up physical activity as well. We know we have much less physical activity in the schools. We know we have much less physical activity getting to and from the schools, and I think there are a number of factors which have been leading to that I think we all understand. But there are a lot of positive efforts in place right now to reverse that. Programs like Safe Routes to Schools to encourage walking and biking to school. A colleague of mine wrote a book called Instant Recess. We've lost in many cases some of the places that kids can be active in schools, and we've lost at times tragically the time that kids have for physical activity, despite the fact that we know that if we take some time for physical activity, not only is that good for health, but test scores will go up, educational achievement will go up. A really interesting program in California, we have a website, jointuse.org, that describes it. But also across the country is joint use. That's a weird technical term, but it basically says when we have community resources, such as parks, such as playgrounds, such as playing fields, let's open those up across the day, across the evening, so that youth and adults can use them. We know that when adults are physically active, it sends a message to youth that this is not just play, this is not just recess, it's an important part of what we do with our life. When we walk to school, when we bicycle, when we emphasize not just driving, we're going to be a lot better off.
And with that, we know that kids spend a lot of time when they're not being active, they spend a lot of screen time. So Ernie, I wondered, I think the average is that kids are spending 7.5 hours a day in front of various screens, whether that's their iPad or their computer or their television set or their iPhone or whatever they've got. And so how much does this screen time play a role in childhood obesity?
Well, screen time gets vilified, I think, but I'm glad that Larry brought up the physical activity side, because that's my personal passion, as well as what Melissa was talking about with integration. And can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Oh, okay. And so I think that like Melissa was saying, teachers in schools are under a lot of pressure, and I just wanted to give an example of Sierra Vista. George Velarde's a PE teacher there in here in Southern California, and they integrate the physical activity with the learning together. So they're learning, they're being physically active at the same time, and we could tie the nutrition education into that, so it could all be integrated together. And like Larry spoke about physical activity impacting test scores and learning, I think that we can do that, because I don't think we're going to be able to go and say just take away all the screens and do that. I'm not a Luddite, but I think we can use the technology, whether it's with active gaming or active learning. I think we can use the technology with mobile apps and activity trackers to combine to teach nutrition, to get them more physically active and make it fun at the same time.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I know that Leonard Epstein at the University of Buffalo, SUNY Buffalo, has been doing some work on that. And it kind of fits in too with a question that we have from a Facebook user, Casey Legler-Hines. She says that, how do we get the word out that food should not be used as a reward in our homes, schools, churches, etc.? And kind of like, can you have other things? It might be activity, might be, I don't know what else, but there might be other things that we could use as a reward rather than food. What do you think about that, Melissa?
I'll tell you, it is one of the most popular discussions. Every time I post something about foods and reward in the social media world, I get, thank you, ideas. It's one of those things as educators, we really have to keep on drilling. I think campaigns should have it, and just like we're seeing the anti-soda campaign, we should have statistics that say, a creative way of getting it out there and sharing these statistics, that it makes the food more desirable, and it brings attention to the food, and saying, hey, instead of giving Hershey Kisses, let's give hugs, and make some kind of simple message that resonates with parents to say, there's so many ways you can reward kids that shows them that you are loving their heart, not just, their healthy heart, to keep their heart healthy, and trying to find a way to get that out there. Like I said, social media, I think it should be in schools. I think we could look at New York City and see how they've, like I said with the soda, and repeat that with saying, don't use foods as rewards, spend time with your kids. Use it as a get in the kitchen, create a recipe with them, something along those lines.
Well, actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because we do have a question from someone who asked, this also came via Twitter, and she asked that we're a nation of non-cooks, raising non-cooks, and so how do we change that? And maybe several of you, Barbara and Christina, maybe you can weigh in, but how do we get both the nutrition education and cooking into the schools?
Well, I think that's really an important question, and Shape Up America is really concerned about the fact that parental obesity is one of the strongest predictors of childhood obesity. And what that does is it raises the question of how we're preparing young people to become parents. I think that even though some of the statistics are starting to improve on childhood obesity, I'm not encouraged that it's going to go back to the levels that we saw 30 years ago unless we start to address parental parenting and how we prepare young people to become good parents. And it can include many of the issues that have been raised today, how to use screens effectively to educate young people, but without sort of shackling them with a sedentary lifestyle, how to understand how to read a food label, and yes, the food labels do need to be redesigned. A whole host of things. Other parenting in our society is not taken as seriously, I think, as it should be, and we need to do more to address the fact that a third of adults in the United States are obese. They are raising children who are now at high risk to become obese, partly because of their parental obesity. So this is something we need to see change in our society about the issue of becoming a parent and taking on the responsibilities of parenthood. I think parents need our support and our understanding, and they don't need to be blamed and punished. They're not responsible for the lack of education and support that they're currently getting. I mean,
actually, that's a really good point, and maybe we can bring Elaine in on this one, but we have a question from Google Plus from Christy Durazo, and she says, okay, so these are all great ideas, and it's wonderful to hear them, but what are some of the really new, innovative, out-of-the-box ideas? And I wondered, Elaine, if you could talk to us about some things that you're seeing happening.
Well, I think I could talk about one program that I'm running, which is our Children's Food and Beverage Advertising Initiative, which is trying to change the food advertising landscape that kids are seeing when they're watching TV. And I agree with people that screen time, there's too much screen time. And what we're trying to do is ensure that when kids are seeing food ads on children's television, that they're seeing ads for healthier products. No, they're not perfect. They're not all for fruits and vegetables, but they've gotten a lot better in the last several years. And we are gratified that the FTC commended the industry for the progress they've made. But I think going back to what people were saying about families, family dinners seem to be so vitally important to children's welfare. I think, Larry talked about violence early on, and I think that family dinners are supposed to have so many positive benefits, not just about eating more fruits and vegetables, but reducing violence and use of drugs. And I wish there was a way we could encourage families to sit down and eat dinner together more often, because I think that's one strategy that could be so effective.
So let's shift to a slightly different topic, and we've got a question here that are talking about the differences of childhood obesity among different groups, and in particular, this questioner asks about African American teenage girls, American Indians, and why we see much higher rates of childhood obesity in some of these special groups, and the questioner asks, what accounts for this, and also how should we address the whole childhood obesity issue in a culturally sensitive way? So Ernie, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, I lived in Japan for a year teaching English during my college years, and what I found is that it's hard to help somebody unless you don't walk in their shoes. So I think one of the first steps that we can do if we want to be culturally sensitive is to really listen. active listening and get right into there. It's easy for us to make suggestions and policies and interventions from our safe places, but I think unless we get our hands dirty and get in there and really see what's going on, I think that's probably a first step to really understanding how can we create culturally effective interventions for different populations.
And I think that obviously every culture is different. Pretty much every culture in its own way has rituals and feelings about food, around sitting down together. Many cultures, try and get out together and have rituals, which we seem to be losing, about being active in many, many ways. But one thing we see across the United States is that that there are issues, cultural issues, you might say, but really primarily equity issues that has been mentioned a little bit earlier, I think by Melissa. We're in a situation where the kinds of rates of diabetes, other food and activity related diseases are far worse in certain low-income communities and communities of color. This is not an accident. This has to do with opportunities. This has to do with the kinds of foods that are marketed and the kinds of foods that are available. This has to do with the ability to walk or bike or go outside safely. One of the reasons we see so much screen time is obviously it's become more common, more addictive, but also we're seeing more screen time because we're in a situation where in many communities it's safer to stay inside and watch TV or look at a computer screen than it is to walk the streets. And we've done a study here where we saw very clearly that when communities are not safe, not only are individuals less likely to go outside to be physically active, are parents willing to let their kids go out to play, but people won't even go a bit further to shop if they don't feel it's safe to do so. And then what starts to happen is the whole community starts to change. So there's less of those environments. The park does not become safe. The streets do not become places where people gather together, talk together, play together. People are more likely to take their cars rather than to wait for the bus and walk to the bus. We're seeing all those kinds of changes, and particularly these changes affect low-income communities, communities of color. So the clearly more important, I think, than the culture issue is the inequity issue, and it should be.
And I'm going we have a couple of questions here. I'm going to shift gears a little bit because I think those are all important points. We have a couple of questions in a slightly new perspective, and it's about looking at the link between sleep and sleep deprivation and childhood obesity. And we know, for example, that a lot of schools start extremely early, and which at times that may be particularly difficult for teens. But just wondered, as we're looking at new reasons or new ways that childhood obesity is fueled, is sleep deprivation something that should also be under consideration? And Christina, do you want to take that?
Sure. This is a really interesting area of research that's going on right now at multiple levels. People are studying the biology and what happens to the body when it's sleep deprived, and is there an interaction that can actually accumulate fat more easily over the course of the day. But we're also looking at it from a behavioral perspective, and many times children who are staying up late are also watching TV, and we know there's a direct association with food consumption when you're watching TV. So there are many variables that go into that relationship, and it's hard to isolate the sleep on its own without the confounding variables that are associated. Children who stay up late are also sleeping in the morning, which decreases their learning time because they're not present in school. And it also throws their eating regulation off, because if you're skipping breakfast and then you're over-consuming later in the day, you're in a vicious cycle. So I'm touching on multiple things that people are studying right now related to sleep and obesity, but I'd say the really interesting area is related to the biology.
And it's a fascinating area. I remember when National Institutes of Health actually did one of the first conferences on this about 10 years ago, and then it was very bold, but it seems like it's continuing to gain momentum, and there's really good research about it.
Yeah.
So,
Sally, there was
yes.
one other thought I was going to add to that. There was a recent study showing that children who have televisions in their bedrooms tend to watch more TV, but they also have less sleep and they have fewer family meals. And the researchers apparently controlled for these other factors and found independently that a TV in the bedroom led to worse health outcomes. So I think, that's food for thought for parents who are letting children have TVs in their own rooms.
And with that, we could probably add screen time for kids who are working late on homework or on their iPads or
Exactly.
tablets or whatever. So we have another question that has come in from someone on Twitter who has asked, how do kids relate to each other in terms of looking at kind of the bullying about weight and making fun of, and I know that when I first wrote the Stoplight Diet for Children, that this was what got me partly interested in it. I watched an event on a soccer field where an overweight kid, who by today's standards wouldn't seem very overweight, was really made fun of. So what role does that kind of how we view overweight or obese children play in tackling this whole issue? And Ernie, I don't know if that's one you want to start with?
Yeah, that's been a really popular thing, play, and I'm all for fun and play. I personally, even though I'm the physical activity evangelist, one of my nicknames, I don't like to exercise per se, but if it's fun, and so if we can find activities, I try to find things that the patients are interested in. We're going paintballing this Sunday on Super Bowl Sunday for one of our friend's son's birthday party, and I wore a pedometer once playing paintball. 4 hours, I had 14,000 steps. And I can guarantee you that none of the kids that were playing with us thought that it was the same as running a mile around the track. So I think that's the thing. We need to. I think a lot of times we have personal biases towards certain types of activities, and I think we're really good. We need to be sort of more open-minded about what can get kids and adults more active, and if we can find what they enjoy doing and what's fun, even if I may not like it, I think that's what we need to focus on.
But Barbara, do you find that in terms of kids bullying each other about their weight, what role does that play, and have you looked at that at all at Shape Up America?
Well, I mean, we have not specifically looked at that, but we have looked at the issue of physical education and the fact that physical education is not required in most schools in the United States any longer the way it was when we were growing up, when it was required every single day. And yes, the kids, we resented it, but it was probably. But today, PE is not necessarily taught by physical education specialists, and those specialists have, over the past, I'd say 15 years, become more tuned into the issue of obesity. Just as one simple example, a PE specialist who really knows what they're doing will not allow children to choose their teams because the fat child will be chosen last. And so instead, the PE specialist who knows what they're doing will set up the teams so that all children are treated with respect and all children have a chance to be active, because too often it's the overweight child who sits on the bench, nobody wants to have them on their team, and they don't get to actually participate as much as thinner children would. So this is an area where we have to do more to train physical education teachers to be more sensitive to this issue, but schools need to treat this as a priority. Schools need to have enough funding to hire a physical education teacher rather than draft the history teacher to teach PE.
Christina, at Childhood Obesity 180, what do you see in terms of kids kind of bullying each other about weight?
Well, we actually just published a paper where we surveyed over 1,000 kids across the country from all different income levels, and it's well understood amongst the children that you will be bullied and socially marginalized if you're overweight, and they fear it and they worry about it, and it's really a problem that's often unspoken about. Now, I think that parents and family doctors and pediatricians should really play an active role in starting the dialogue around this at a very young age. It's something that often goes on, it's quite hurtful, and it's too late by the time it's spoken about. I also want to, oh, go ahead, sorry.
So it's just, how do they do that? How do they broach that topic of not just bullying, but bullying because of weight?
Right. I think pediatricians should be talking when the children are very young to the parents, and when the children are old enough directly to them. And there's a lot of good training that's happening with continuing education now that this is a societal problem, to really bring in nurse practitioners and physicians, et cetera, to make this a topic that is open in the protected office environment. And the other, go ahead, Larry.
I was just going to say, I hate to say this, but I think that we all are contributing to this by focusing on a term like obesity. At Prevention Institute here, we actually call it the O word and go out of our way, as you may have noticed in a number of my comments, I'm talking about eating and activity-related diseases, because we really feel like the focus on obesity, which comes from us as adults, not from kids, the focus on obesity, the focus on fat, is stigmatizing in ways that actually make the situation worse, not better. When people are overweight and they feel stigmatized, they're far less likely to be physically active. When people are not overweight, they too are at risk of health problems, but are far more likely to say, oh, it's not a problem for me because I'm not overweight. And furthermore, we have lots of problems as well with things like anorexia, serious mental health problems related to this obsession with weight rather than an obsession with health and with well-being. I actually think we should throw out the word obesity. It's hard to do that, but I think there's an opportunity and a necessity to think in a different way. Otherwise, expecting some physical activity teacher at a school is going to be able to fix a problem that our entire society is creating is unfortunately, I think, unrealistic.
Yeah, I actually agree with Larry. And all the studies that I've done, we never spoke about the word obesity, particularly with children. It's about feeling powerful and strong and eating smart and playing hard. And those are the messages we need to give children. What we're talking about today is adult to adult and in a professional environment. But I totally agree. We shouldn't be overshadowing the country with an obesity fear.
I think those are really good thoughts. We have another question. This is also from Twitter, and the question is: do kids socially tend to support healthy efforts, if not, is there something that we could do to encourage them to really say, you know, we're all in this together. We need to do this. Melissa, what do you think about that?
Oh, that's a tough one. You know what? I'm going to let Christina weigh in on that first. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
I'm happy to. I mean, we've engaged children and done youth empowerment in all of our work. And at a certain age, really past the age of 7 or 8, they're on board. They want to feel powerful and strong. They're interested in civic engagement. They understand issues that are impacting them. And if it's done in a constructive way, you can really engage them. And at Child Obesity 180, we've recruited student ambassadors to help with our physical activity work, brought them to Washington. They were up on stage talking about it, ready to rally within their communities, and I think we need to use kids more. Larry brought up some models of tobacco. If you look at recycling, tobacco, seatbelts, kids were involved in all of those issues, and they made a big impact.
So I would like to weigh in on that. I was thinking of it outside of the education experience. In other words, if I go in and I'm doing a presentation or an interactive workshop with the kids, and they're tasting, you know, mint and tasting the herbs and all the different foods, they're totally gung-ho, and they get into it, and they encourage their friends. But if I'm looking at it from a mom, as a perspective of maybe a Girl Scout troop leader, and I see how they interact, unless I'm there using those powerful words, you know, eat foods for a healthy body so you can run faster, jump higher, you know, do better in school, and I look at it from an outside perspective, it would be hard for me to comment to say that socially kids are encouraging other kids to eat healthy foods, because most of the time they're not even provided healthy foods to begin with, to encourage their friends to eat healthy foods.
And the marketing messages that are constant are about unhealthy foods.
Exactly. Exactly.
I was gonna say something too about that. You know, 2 points that come to my mind on how we can encourage kids is number one is modeling. You know, we as parents and leaders need to model the behavior. And you know, for too many times I've heard people or seen people talk the talk but not walk the talk. So I think we need to encourage parents to model. And then the second thing is what builds their kids' self-esteem, and you know what gets them to want to try new things, and success is that. And I find that when I work with a lot of our overweight kids, they are on the bench because they're not, you know, they do have challenges. And I growing up, I never liked basketball because I was always the shortest kid in the whole school, and I never excelled at that. But I excelled at other sports because I was successful. And so one thing that we've done with active gaming is done tournaments where these kids who typically are not very good at sports are very good at video games, and then when you get them competing in video games, they do very well, and they could be sweating to death, and they don't want to stop. And I've had this idea of trying to start a national active gaming league, similar to like my daughter was on a swim team for 6 or 7 years, or similar to the spelling bee, where you know you get kids studying on their own and motivated. And you know the national spelling bee is on ESPN of all places. What if we had, you know, an active gaming league tournament for kids who aren't the softball, swimmer, soccer types, but they're into active gaming? That would give them success. They would have fun with their friends, and you know, if we tell them, look, you know, we could make it to ESPN, I mean, I think they'd be excited. So again, that pulls in the play aspect and meeting them where they're at.
You just have to find some healthy sponsors.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, we have another question. This one is also from Twitter, and the question is, can someone touch on the use of fat-free labeled foods and artificial sweeteners and how they impact young bodies? So I don't know, Barbara or Christina, do you want to?
Sure, I'll take that. Starting with artificial sweeteners first, I think there is a great deal of misplaced concern about the use of artificial sweeteners. It's true that I encourage the use of water, plain water, in lieu of soda, but many people use artificial sweeteners, and most of those sweeteners have been on the market for a long time, and their safety record, I think, is trustworthy. And I know that there are a number, there's a large, not necessarily large, but at least a significant segment of the public that doesn't trust them. Fine, don't use them. But I do not discourage the use of artificially sweetened products and beverages for children and adults alike. What was the other one?
The other one is on fat-free labeled foods.
Yeah, I mean, there is, I myself don't enjoy the use of fat-free or even not necessarily low-fat foods. I prefer to use portion control to allow me to enjoy regular food products, including some full-fat products, although I must say I don't use them very often. But I really don't enjoy the low-fat and fat-free products. I try to get around them by using the real thing in reasonable quantities, and I certainly don't use high-fat desserts on a daily basis, or even necessarily every other day. I mean, I might have a dish of ice cream once a month or something like that.
But how does that work for kids, and particularly those obviously who are 2 and older? I know that the recommendations are to have a higher fat content for some of those 2 and under. But if we're looking at fat-free for kids or low-fat, where does that fit in for those who are 2 and older?
Well, one of the things that's already been touched upon is not using food as a reward, and I do think that that's used in schools a great deal. I have teachers sheepishly admitting to me that they use food as a reward in the classroom, and you know, often there are birthday parties before lunch. So birthday parties are held in the morning, and then when the kids get to lunch, you know, they're no longer hungry, and so they're not eating nutritious foods. I mean, there is a lot of craziness going on in schools around the use of these higher fat items. Of course, if you want to celebrate a birthday and you want to have a cupcake with a regular buttercream icing, I guess that you know, that's what's going on. Parents are sending their kids to school with these kinds of desserts. It's very, very hard for the school to regulate this. But this is the kind of thing that has to happen. We've got to be firmer about what's permitted in schools, whether it's sold in schools in vending machines or in the cafeteria, or whether it's brought in by children from their homes to celebrate a birthday. And certainly the idea of having recess before lunch in a school is a much better idea than having a birthday party before lunch in the school.
So, Sally, I was
Oh.
going to say, when I think of low-fat, sorry, Ernie.
Oh, no, yeah, go ahead.
When I think of low-fat and fat-free, I was thinking of all the low-fat and fat-free dairy products that are now available in the product, and especially made attractive to children, like the yogurts, for example, which are healthy choices. Yes, the younger children may need more fat in their diet, but as you say, over age 2, and I think Melissa was saying even younger children might need lower fat products. The marketplace has responded with a large number of products that can meet the need of providing the calcium, the vitamin D that comes with dairy, but in a low-fat or fat-free option. And we've also seen the quick-serve restaurants respond in this way. So, for example, Burger King switched out from low-fat to fat-free milk for its kids' meals, and McDonald's uses 1% milk or no-fat chocolate milk in its Happy Meals. So we do see the marketplace responding in a positive way on this fat issue.
I just want to step in on this notion of the marketplace responding, because I think that's a very, very important point. And I want to emphasize that it's responding, and it's almost entirely responding when we provide enormous, coherent community pressure. This is, as George Albee said when he talked about prevention, no epidemic can ever be resolved solely by focusing on the affected individual. It's only when we speak about the kinds of unhealthy norms we have in this society, when we insist that food suppliers provide healthier food and that they not deceive us in their marketing, and that they not deceive us in their product preparation, and that they start to turn this around. I know what went into Burger King changing their mind, Starbucks changing their mind, McDonald's changing their mind, and what went into it was a feeling that it was the only choice that was left for them in order to maintain their profit margin. We need to understand that we need to speak coherently as a community, and our policies need to reflect a very, very different vision, precisely because the alternative is the first generation where kids are not going to live as long as their parents.
And I just want to remind everyone listening that we have a large number of foods that are naturally available that are fat-free, fruits and vegetables, and they're under-consumed in this country. So that's a good place to emphasize fat-free foods that are natural, rather than manipulating tasty foods that could be consumed with some fat in them.
I was just going to add, too, that, we need to provide or give parents ideas of healthy substitutes for some of these things, whether you're replacing the junk food or even some of these other things. Like, for example, my daughter, she doesn't eat refined sugar or fats or junk food anymore, but she loves ice cream. So every night she does have a bowl of ice cream, but we make it with a Champion machine, frozen fruits in it. Out comes soft serve, and it's just pure frozen fruits, and that's it. And she doesn't miss Haagen-Dazs. She doesn't miss, all the other frozen. So we have to provide healthy substitutions. And I think Melissa's website, for example, I use it all the time with my patients to show them, hey, there are a lot of resources and healthy substitutions. You don't have to fall and eat those things that people bring to school or parties or whatever, because it can be done.
And, we really need to reach people, and I think that goes back to bringing it back to the school. The school is a wonderful way to reach people at all different economic levels, and I know they're already burdened with so much on their plate, but I look at my daughter's school, they had a cooking class when I dropped her off this morning. Parents really don't know. They think it's overwhelming, and to be able to have hands-on experience that say, look, you only need this many tools, just a few things. You only need a few ingredients, and explain, guess what? Whole grains, fruits, beans, avocados, these are all natural foods that can taste great, and they're easy to prepare. And in an environment that is reflective of their own community, their own culture, that they feel safe, and the bottom line, it's convenient and it's free. And I think, that's where we really need to have these posters, these campaigns, and these health messages.
Well, that's a great way to lead into another question that we have from Twitter, where someone asks, can parents be actually too weight obsessed about their kids, and what kind of a negative effect does that have? And does it, in a way, ruin the relationship that children end up having with food? So, Barbara or Christina, I don't know if that's a question you might like to take.
Sure, I can jump in for. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Barbara.
It's okay. I mean, I agree. You know, it's the enjoyment of food is one of the things that makes life worth living, and we have to really guard against disrupting the relationship between children and food. And I think, though, that Melissa has made some great points that you can really enjoy healthy food. And Christina, you did too, about fruits and vegetables being the naturally low-fat foods that children love. And you know, and there are examples where children have learned how to ask for a carrot for dessert. You know, I mean, that may seem preposterous, but it happens. It actually does happen. So the way in which we frame food and the way in which we simply have to be respectful of the relationship between human beings and food, and we can't be portraying food as the enemy. We have to learn how to enjoy it and to do so in a reasonable way.
You know, this is a topic, Christine, I'm sorry, I have to jump in here. I'm very passionate about this because I see it with so many of my friends, and I've seen it as young recently with one of my friend's daughters, 7 years old, already having body images and thinking she was fat. And if I plugged her into the CDC and put her BMI in, she's not even overweight. You know, she is a healthy, more muscular child who's into gymnastics, and their family does point out obese or overweight people, and I had to explain to her, you know, it's a form of bullying, that it's not kind, you know, and I see it so often. I see parents who are talking about dieting. They say things like, I look fat in this, instead of, you know, I look beautiful, you know, to try to encourage that healthy relationship with your body. It's something that women, you know, with media, we're faced with always getting all those images of perfection, and we can easily and negatively impact our children. And I think, you know, again, it goes back to what Larry was saying with the food marketing. It's the same thing with the image of women and body, and that impacts our relationship with food. And parents need to be very careful about the conversations they have out loud with other adults, and how they discuss food with their children.
I think there's hope in that, Melissa, because the kinds of issues you're describing affect people who are involved in a lot of other concerns besides healthy eating. I'm working, for example, with a group of parents who are concerned about child sexual abuse and exploitation, and they're just as concerned about the images of women that are being portrayed, and just as active in saying we can't allow that to be the case. That's why when we talked earlier about things like the O word, we need a way of emphasizing health and well-being, and not just for our kids, but we got to start with ourselves. We got to start with our communities. We can't expect our kids to solve the problem, or somehow they're going to do it right when we're not willing to do it right.
Yeah, and I just want to comment on the restriction. There's a rich body on parenting style and feeding style, rich body of literature showing that restriction doesn't work, and it really is problematic for kids. It may be well intended, but it usually backfires. So people hate the word moderation, but I think that's what we're all saying, is it's about health and feeling strong and eating in moderation and enjoying life and connecting with food, and not getting caught up in trying to be perfect and, you know, eliminating anything with fat and sugar.
So this has been such a great and wide-ranging conversation, and can't thank you all enough for your insights and your time and coming to us coast to coast. Unfortunately, our time is up, and I know we could talk about this topic. It's one of our favorites. We could probably continue it for the rest of the afternoon, or, you know, the week or a month. So we still have probably more ground to cover. So for those of you who are out there and you've been watching, and those of you who are part of our team members, this conversation will continue, and that's the great thing about TEDMED. So it will continue online at TEDMED.com on the Great Challenge page for reducing childhood obesity. I want those who submitted questions via Facebook and Twitter and Google+. We're just delighted that you spent this time with us, and thank you to the TEDMED community who is a part of all this. And like I mentioned, this is going to continue on TEDMED.com. You can also post comments and questions at TEDMED's Facebook page, and we really do welcome everybody's input. So keep those questions and comments coming. And just a reminder that the next live event will be on Thursday, February 7th, so mark your calendars. It's at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. The topic is addressing healthcare costs, and improving medical education will also occur that same day. So you actually have 2 opportunities that day to participate in these events. The improving medical communication will be from 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And just to repeat, the addressing healthcare costs will be from, we will start at 1 p.m. So finally, we would be remiss not to thank our sponsor, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, who is sponsoring this Great Challenges program. And thank you again to our team and to all of you. We've really enjoyed being with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sally.
Thank you.